Welcome, dear horror listener. You're tuning into Horror Radio, and I'm truly grateful you're here. Whether you're a long-time listener or just stumbled upon this channel, thank you for joining me for another scary tale. If you enjoy these stories, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow and means more than you know. I'd also love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from, what brought you here, or even what kind of story you'd like to hear next. Your support keeps this channel going, and I appreciate each and every one of you. Now, let's get into today's horror story. Some stories stay with you because they creep up slowly, quietly, and then all at once you realize how close you came to something you can't explain away. That's what this feels like. Something I didn't see clearly until it was too late, when the danger was already at my doorstep. My name's Emily, and this happened while I was in college in Madison, Wisconsin. Like a lot of students, I passed the same corners every day walking to and from campus. There was this man, older than most of the students, maybe mid-40s or 50s, who panhandled outside the coffee shop I went to before classes. His name was Carl. Carl wasn't like the other guys I saw around. He sang opera music of all things, and even though it wasn't perfect, it was surprisingly good. He wasn't holding a guitar case or bucket for tips. He wasn't busking in the traditional sense. He was panhandling. But somehow the singing felt like his way of showing that he was still trying to give something in return. I don't usually give money directly to people on the street. I'd rather donate to shelters where I know it goes further. But with Carl, I bent the rule. Mostly just coins or a crumpled dollar when I had it. Sometimes I'd stop to talk to him, even when I didn't have cash. He'd do impressions or crack jokes, little things to make students laugh. He always remembered my name, which I told myself was sweet. He'd share bits of his life in these bursts of honesty. How he'd almost gone to college on a baseball scholarship before drugs derailed everything. Stuff that was raw and way too personal for a quick street chat. But I didn't want to be rude, so I'd give some small personal fact in return. Nothing deep, just surface-level things like what sport I played or what classes I was struggling with. One time, I stopped while walking with my professor, who also happened to be my advisor. I thought it would be polite to say hi to Carl, introduce him quickly. But when we walked away, my professor looked shaken. He asked why Carl knew my name, why I was talking to him so casually. I brushed it off, told him about Carl singing, how he was funny, how he wasn't like other panhandlers. My professor frowned, told me it wasn't safe. He said the people who are on the streets long enough for you to recognize are often the ones battling the hardest demons. Criminal records, addiction, mental illness. He wasn't cruel about it, just firm. You don't have the experience to judge who's harmless and who isn't, he said. You're not helping him. You're putting yourself at risk. I didn't take him seriously. Honestly, I thought he sounded elitist. I walked away thinking, okay, boomer, and doubled down, feeling proud of myself for being different, enlightened, building bridges where others just turned away. But things shifted not long after. The next time I saw Carl, he was irritable, distant, until he asked me, out of nowhere, "So your boyfriend, do you two live together?" I blinked, caught off guard. "What boyfriend?" I asked. He frowned. "The guy you were with yesterday. The one I met." It clicked. He met my professor. I laughed it off, told him, "Oh no, that wasn't my boyfriend. That was just my advisor." Immediately his mood flipped. The irritation was gone. He was warm, chatty again, like nothing had happened. I didn't think much of it in the moment. But looking back, that was the first red flag I should have taken seriously. Soon after, Carl started giving me little gifts. A flower, a random trinket, even once a piece of metal he claimed was from a machine he'd worked on years ago. I never refused, telling myself it was just his way of keeping dignity when I gave him money. I convinced myself it was harmless. One of my roommates saw the flower once and asked where it came from. When I explained, she told me it was weird. I rolled my eyes, assumed she was just being judgmental. I didn't want to admit that her discomfort mirrored something small and unsettled in my own stomach. Even my professor brought up again later, saying he was worried I was being manipulated. I started explaining Carl's quirks, his singing, his sense of humor, but then I stopped short when I remembered the story about his scholarship and drugs. Remembered the way he talked about an ex-girlfriend who overreacted to something he'd done. I didn't say that part out loud, but it lingered in my mind. Then the pandemic hit. Classes went remote, and like most people, I moved home to my parents' place to save money and keep safe. For weeks I didn't think about Carl at all. Then one night, scrolling Instagram, I watched a friend's story and froze. In the background, faint but distinct, I heard opera music. My stomach twisted because I knew that voice. Carl's. The weird part, the video wasn't in Madison. It was from my hometown, a city several hours away. At first I brushed it off. People move. The pandemic shuffled everyone around. It had to be coincidence, until another girl from my high school called me. She said, "This is going to sound really weird, but I think I should tell you. There was a beggar downtown asking about you. He knew your major. He knew you played volleyball. He knew a lot." I wanted to rationalize it. She'd been wearing a sweatshirt from our college, so maybe he just guessed she might know me. Maybe he was just checking in, asking about me. I told myself it was sweet, if a little odd. When I eventually moved back near campus, I didn't think about him again, until I saw him, right back on the same corner, as if nothing had changed. That's when I finally stopped talking to him. I quit giving him money, quit making eye contact. I thought if I ignored him, it would all fade away. I told no one. I was too embarrassed to admit how far I'd let it go. Then, after finals, I went to stay with my brother in Minneapolis. His roommate had moved out, leaving an extra bed, and it felt like the perfect escape. 9 days in, early one morning, I heard voices at the door. My brother was talking to someone. His tone was calm, polite, but when he turned toward me, his face was furious. He shut the door quickly, turned to me, and hissed, "Are you kidding me? Mom and Dad are gonna kill you." I thought the cops were at the door, maybe something about my fake ID. But no, he went on, whisper yelling, "You're dating a 40-something guy, and you brought him here without even asking? During pandemic? Are you insane?" I stared, totally lost. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said. He didn't believe me. "He knows your name. He said you had a fight. Said he came to make it right. Don't lie to me, Emily. I'm not Mom and Dad. I can't help you if you lie." Confused, I finally looked through the peephole, and my heart dropped. Carl. Clean clothes, shaved, hair slicked back. He looked almost unrecognizable, but it was him, hundreds of miles from Madison, standing on my brother's doorstep. I backed away, dizzy, sick to my stomach. I whispered. He followed me. My brother still didn't understand, thought maybe I was exaggerating. He tried brushing it off, telling Carl I wasn't there, but Carl wouldn't leave. He started shouting through the door, saying he'd cleaned himself up for me, that he came to rescue me, that I was his girlfriend. When he circled to the window and pressed his face against the glass, I almost couldn't move. His eyes were wide, his hands trembling. He pounded on the window, shouting for me to come out. My brother braced the door while Carl screamed, "That's my girlfriend in there. You can't keep her from me." Then he punched through the glass. Blood poured from his hand, but he didn't even flinch. He kept shouting, rambling nonsense, calling my brother names, promising me he was coming. My brother yelled at me to call 911 while he held the door. I don't even remember dialing, but somehow I did. By the time the police arrived, Carl had worn himself out. They pulled him away easily. He kept insisting he was saving me, that I loved him, that we were together. My brother even got questioned, briefly cuffed, because Carl told the cops I was being held against my will. And then, as they led him to the cruiser, he started singing opera again. That sound still haunts me. The way he believed every word he said. The way I'd ignored all the signs until it escalated so far. Carl was never just a quirky panhandler who sang to keep dignity. He was a man swallowed by addiction and delusion. Someone whose illness blurred the line between reality and obsession. And I let myself believe I was helping, when all I'd done was invite him closer. Some things you live through once, but they keep echoing in your head like they never ended. That's what this memory feels like to me. Something that could have ruined my life, but instead cracked it open and showed me where I was headed if I didn't change. I've gone back to that night more times than I can count. Every time I retell it, even just in my head, I pick up a new detail. The way the hallway smelled like smoke and spilled beer. The way the old ceiling fan buzzed against the weight of a summer evening. The way my own voice sounded in my ears when I screamed. It never goes away. My name's Sarah, and I grew up in a small town outside of Tulsa, Oklahoma. People think of Tulsa as a city, but the smaller towns around it are different. Tight in some ways, forgotten in others. That's where I spent my childhood. My parents split when I was young, and neither one of them really had their lives together. My dad drifted in and out, drinking too much, working odd jobs, never staying in one place long enough to be stable. My mom, on the other hand, was stuck in her own cycle, using, finding new men, convincing herself that each one was going to be different. Every time she said, "This one's good, Sarah, this one's not like the others," I wanted to believe her, but never turned out that way. It meant I grew up surrounded by instability, people in and out of the house, strangers who felt more like intruders than anything else. I remember nights waking up to voices I didn't recognize in the kitchen, men laughing too loudly, the clink of bottles, the smell of smoke drifting into my room. When I was little, I used to lie there under my blanket, frozen, praying the door wouldn't creak open. That sense of being unsafe in your own house changes you. You learn to carry yourself like you don't care. You learn to build walls high enough that nothing can get through, at least not on the surface. By the time I was 12, I'd already started following the same path. Drinking when I could get my hands on something, sneaking smokes behind a middle school, hanging out with kids older than me who were just as lost. We thought we were tough. We thought being reckless was freedom. By 14, I'd been arrested twice. Once for underage drinking, another time for fighting outside a roller rink. I wore my trouble like armor. If I didn't care, then no one could hurt me. That's how I thought back then. If you showed weakness, you lost. The night that changed me started like plenty of others. I was 15, stumbling home after drinking with friends at the park. The walk back is etched in my mind. The air was heavy, humid in that way Oklahoma nights get in the summer, where every breath feels damp. The street lights hummed overhead, insects swirling around them in frantic circles. My sneakers slapped against the pavement, uneven from how much I'd had to drink. My head buzzed and my stomach felt sour, but mostly I was just tired, wanting to collapse in a bed before my mom noticed how late it was. When I walked in, the living room light was still on. My mom and her boyfriend at the time were sitting on the couch. He was one of those guys who always made me uneasy, the kind of man who smiles with his mouth, but not his eyes. His stare always lingered too long, and there was a hardness in him that made my skin crawl. That night, he looked at me like he'd been waiting. "Where you been?" he asked, and I could hear that edge in his voice, sharp and accusing. "Out," I muttered, trying to slide past him to my room. I kept my head down, hoping he'd let it go. But before I could, he shoved me back, hard enough that I fell against the wall. My shoulder hit the plaster, sending a jolt of pain down my arm. My mom shouted at him, but he ignored her completely. His focus was on me, and it was like nothing else existed. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in tight, and dragged me toward the spare room down the hall. My stomach dropped. The look on his face wasn't just anger. It was darker, twisted into something that made my skin crawl even more than his touch. He pushed me inside and slammed the door shut. My mom started pounding on it, screaming for him to stop. Her voice was desperate, but muffled, just noise behind the wood. He leaned close, so close I could smell the alcohol on his breath, and I'll never forget what he said. "I'm about to show you why it's bad to let your mom worry about you." It wasn't the words as much as the way he said them. Calm, almost rehearsed, with this little smirk that told me he'd thought about it before. That expression is burned into my memory. I still see it sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding. I screamed. My voice cracked, raw, but I didn't care. He lunged, and I fought back with everything I had. I scratched at his face, kicked, clawed, trying to make myself bigger than I was. For a second, it almost didn't matter. He was bigger, stronger, and I felt like I was drowning under his weight. But then my nails raked across his cheek, leaving deep red lines. Something in him snapped. His face twisted with rage. For a split second, I thought then that I was done for. But outside, my mom had finally called the police. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder, cutting through the chaos in my head. He froze, eyes darting toward the window, then cursed under his breath. By the time the officers burst through the door, I was curled in the corner, shaking, while he was trying to make excuses. They arrested him on the spot, and my mom too, for possession. The night ended with the house in chaos. Lights flashing through the windows, neighbors watching from their porches, whispers carrying in the sticky night air. I sat there numb, wrapped in a blanket one of the officers had thrown over me, barely able to process that it was finally over. There was one officer who stood out to me. He was older, maybe around 60, and I'd seen it before. Every time I got into trouble, he seemed to be the one called. He was tough on me, always telling me I was headed nowhere good if I didn't straighten up. That night, after they took my mom away, he sat with me at the station while they figured out where I'd go. He looked at me, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "I'm really sorry about all of this, Sarah, but you're not going home tonight. Not this time." I stared at him, exhausted, too numb to argue. He leaned closer, his expression serious, and his words cut straight through me. "It's time for you to make a choice. Do you want to end up like her? Or do you want to be somebody?" Something in me broke open. For the first time, I thought about what it meant to be somebody. I didn't want to keep replaying my mom's mistakes. I didn't want to keep circling the same drain. Through tears, I told him I wanted to change. That was the beginning. They placed me in foster care, which was brutal at first. Different homes, strange families, feeling like I didn't belong anywhere. I remember sitting on the edge of a twin bed in a stranger's house, staring at walls decorated with pictures that weren't mine, feeling more alone than I'd ever felt. But it was distance. Distance from my mom's boyfriends, from the parties, from the streets I kept stumbling down. Slowly, it gave me space to see who I could be. That officer, his name was Frank, stayed in my life. Even after I turned 18 and aged out, he kept in touch. He'd check in, sometimes harsh, sometimes kind, but always honest. When I thought about giving up, he reminded me of that night, of the choice I'd made. He reminded me that my story didn't have to end the same way as my mom's. Years later, I got a job as a corrections officer. I wanted to be on the other side of that line, the way Frank had been for me. Every day I walk into that facility, I think of him, of the way he saw something in me worth saving. He passed away last year, and I still feel the loss like a hollow in my chest. But I try to honor him by living the life he pushed me toward. The best part is my mom eventually found her way out too. Losing me forced her to see what her choices were costing. She's been sober for almost a decade now, remarried to a man who treats her with respect. Our relationship isn't perfect, but it's real, and I never thought I'd be able to say that. Looking back, that night could have destroyed me, but it didn't. It showed me the cycle I was stuck in, the one my family had lived in for generations. And it gave me the push I needed to break out. The memory of that man's face still haunts me. The smirk, the promise of something awful. But I hold on tighter to Frank's words. "Do you want to be somebody?" I chose yes, and it saved me. Some disappearances leave behind almost nothing. No crime scene, No note, no trace. Just absence, heavy and permanent, with 1,000 theories that never fit cleanly together. I've thought about this one more than I care to admit, because it's a case that feels like it slipped through cracks too wide for anyone to climb back out of. Every time I go over the details, I circle back to the same places, the same unanswered questions, and the same eerie silence that has followed this case for years. It's not just the lack of evidence that makes it so haunting. It's the way it feels like people already decided who Angela, Michael, and Lisa were, and by doing that, stopped looking too closely. My name's Aaron, and I used to live in Knoxville, Tennessee. Back in 2017, 3 people I knew in passing. People tied together by drugs, by bad timing, by the fragility of addiction, vanished on the same day. December 27th, right after Christmas. Their names were Angela Morris, Michael Turner, and Lisa Harmon. They'd all lived together for a while in a rundown apartment off Linden Avenue. But by December the place had lost power, and they'd scattered to different corners of East Knoxville. Still, they never cut ties completely. That was part of the problem. Addiction has a way of weaving people together in knots that are hard to untangle, no matter how destructive the bond becomes. Angela was 38, a mother who had been in and out of recovery programs for years. She'd stayed at a halfway house that fall, trying to get clean, but a relapse pushed her back out. People said she wanted to do better. She had a husband who cared about her, a man studying in another city, working toward a degree, and trying to keep hope alive for her and their family. She had 5 kids, 4 of them already grown, and one who still needed her every day. Those kids were split between relatives when she couldn't take care of them. People close to her say she'd been trying again, talking about God more, talking about fresh starts, writing down little goals she hoped she could meet. But the pull of old habits was never far away. The wrong friend, the wrong street, the wrong night. It was always enough to undo months of work. Lisa, her closest friend, was rougher around the edges. She was the kind of person who came off fearless, but most of that was a mask. She'd had a long-term boyfriend, but he'd been arrested after a domestic violence charge and was sitting in jail that winter. He was still behind bars when she vanished. Lisa was known for drifting. She didn't keep solid contact with her family, and they didn't always know where she was living. Sometimes she'd show up at her mom's for a few days. Sometimes she'd be with Angela, and sometimes she'd be on her own in places that were half-legal rentals or weekly motels. Her posts online were scattered and inconsistent, the kind of updates that made it clear she was living day to day, never planning much further ahead than her next fix. There were moments of humor, flashes of warmth, but under it all was exhaustion. Michael, the third, was 34. He was quieter than the 2 women, but no less caught in the same spiral. Earlier in 2017, he'd been engaged, talking about a future that might look different. But by the fall, the relationship had collapsed. His Facebook went from engaged to single, and his posts turned dark. A string of quotes about heartbreak, depression, emptiness. Friends checked in on him, asked how he was holding up, but the tone of his replies was distant, almost rehearsed, like he didn't want to open up but didn't know how to hide it either. He was staying in a cheap motel on Cherry Street, a place known for housing people who were just barely scraping by. That motel was only a few minutes from where Angela's car would later be found. That December 27th, Angela visited her uncle at the University of Tennessee Medical Center. He was in the ICU, and family gathered there to see him. Lisa went with her. A relative gave Angela $25 before she left, just a little bit of money to help her get by. The 2 women drove away in Angela's silver Honda Accord. That was the last time anyone in their families saw them alive. Later that same day, Michael disappeared too. His cousin said he'd last been in the Magnolia and Cherry Street area, shuttling between his motel and an apartment behind a Shoney's on Rutledge Pike. That detail sticks because it anchors him so close to the places Angela and Lisa were last seen driving toward. Michael had his struggles, but he wasn't the type to just vanish without a word. He kept regular contact with his father, calling every week without fail. Those calls stopped cold after December 27th. That silence was the first real sign something was terribly wrong. Angela's husband grew frantic after days without hearing from her. He drove back from school and started searching himself. It was him, not the police, who found her car nearly a month later, on January 21st. It was parked on Buffett Mill Road, not far from Fulton High School. Inside were all her belongings, her ID, social security card, debit cards, even personal items she never left without. It looked like she had stepped out and never returned. For her husband, finding that car must have been a gut punch. You hope for a clue, something to point to where she is, but all he found was absence made physical. The police logged it, but they didn't do much else. No forensics, no impound, no deep dive into whether fingerprints or DNA in the car could tell them who'd been there. It was just another car on another road in the city, already drowning in overdoses and disappearances. For families desperate for answers, that lack of urgency was almost as painful as the loss itself. Lisa managed to send a message to a relative on January 1st, saying she needed money for food and cigarettes. That's the last contact. Nobody has actually seen her since that night at the hospital. For someone already living a transient lifestyle, it might have been easy to dismiss her silence at first. But as days turned into weeks, even people who knew her as unreliable began to worry. Families were left to fill in the gaps. Angela's sister said she'd last seen her at a Weigel's gas station on Chapman Highway, across the river from the hospital, sometime on the 27th. That detail has always bothered me. If true, it puts her movements right in a corridor where several other women with drug histories had gone missing around that time. Some from treatment centers, some from halfway houses. A pattern that nobody wanted to talk about too loudly. To say it out loud would mean admitting there was something larger happening in Knoxville than just drugs claiming lives slowly. What ties them together is the place. East Knoxville, Buffett Mill Road, the strip of neighborhoods and side streets where heroin was moving faster than police could track it. People there knew the names, knew who was selling, who was using, who had power. And 3 people with deep drug connections vanished the same day, within blocks of each other. It feels impossible to chalk that up to coincidence. Michael's disappearance added another layer. He wasn't the type to just vanish. Depressed, sure. Using, definitely. But not disappearing. His father said those weekly calls were his lifeline, his tether to something normal. Cutting that off without warning was unthinkable. His motel room sat empty. His things left behind. No trace of where he'd gone. Mapping it all out, it looks almost too neat. Angela and Lisa leave the hospital in the Honda. Maybe they swing by the Weigels. Maybe they head toward Buffett Mill. Maybe they pick up Michael from his motel. That would put all 3 of them together, right near where Angela's car turned up weeks later. But then what? If it was an overdose, how do 3 bodies disappear? Who was there to clean it up? Why dump the car, but leave every single personal belonging untouched? If it was foul play, who gains from taking 3 addicts off the board at once? These are the questions that grind at the families, because the answers never came. Theories spun in every direction. Some said they left willingly, chasing drugs or running from debts. But that never squared with the details. Angela's car abandoned with her IDs. Michael cutting off his father with no explanation. Lisa, who had no reason to stay hidden, not surfacing even once. Others think it was part of a larger pattern. Women with addictions disappearing, their cases buried under the weight of stigma. When society sees people as disposable, it's easier to let their disappearances fade into background noise. The hardest part is the silence. No bodies, no arrests, no answers. Just 3 families left to wonder. Angela's husband still searches. Her sister still posts about her. Michael's father still waits for a call that doesn't come. Lisa's family, less vocal, but still hoping, still asking. even if it's quieter now than it was in the first frantic months. It's been years now. December comes around and I think about them. 3 people bound together by circumstance, by addiction, by a city that swallows its most vulnerable. On December 27th, 2017, they vanished. Not just for Knoxville, but for memory too, unless you dig deep enough to find their names buried in local reports. Angel Morris, Michael Turner, Lisa Harmon, 3 names that should still mean something. 3 lies that remind me how addiction doesn't just destroy slowly. It can erase suddenly, without warning, leaving nothing behind but questions no one wants to answer.